Good morning, everyone. I'll get to the business of the day immediately, posing my first question to the Governor. Governor, you and the central bank played a critical role in the stabilization of Sri Lanka's economy from a negative GDP growth in 2022 to today. We have adequate reserves, stable currency, political stability, and a stock market at an all-time high. Give a quick snapshot of where the economy is and how the platform has been built for takeoff.
Yeah, thank you, Thilan, and also thank you for the organizers giving me opportunity. Obviously, as we all see from the data, we have our macro situation that pretty much stabilized now from the crisis point that we had in 2022 and 2023. And the evidence, obviously, data speaks. For example, now economic growth, what we were expecting under the baseline scenario of the IMF is around 3% growth, medium term, long term, but continuously 6 quarters of growth. We have reached close to 5% now, and we're going to see continuously, as a potential and ability to grow around 5% in next several years, which will obviously basically lay the foundation for better living standards, higher per capita income. So all these things will happen with the stabilization of overall macro situation, fiscal, monetary, external in terms of reserves, current accounts, all these things is moving quite nicely. Going forward, what's important is to stabilization convert into a growth trajectory which will fast track the improvements in the country. For that, one initiative is digitalization, digital public infrastructure. Digitalization, I'm sure Hans talk about, is basically across all the sectors of the economy. That is where one of the key initiatives is to enable this continuous high growth path going next several years, is to bring in those reforms. And one important one is the digitalization to enable this growth to continue, and also ready for the the next generation of growth, basically mainly should be based on technology-driven growth. That is why I think this forum is important to convert that growth into not on the basis of traditional growth drivers, but more modern technology-driven growth drivers. That transformation needs to happen. For that to happen, we need to have this kind of a transformation growth for the sources and the enablers for the growth going forward.
Thank you, Governor. I'll come back to you. I would like to go to Hans. Hans, as you're aware, starting from the late 90s when the telecom liberalization took place, and I was a part of that when we privatized telecom and brought in competition, the ICT services sector, and particularly the export sector, has grown in a compound annual growth rate of over 15% to reach about $1.5 billion today. Now, we are intending on doubling that by 2030 to more than doubling to $5 billion. Can you give a quick snapshot of particularly the institutional and the legal framework? You touched on it on your presentation, particularly in connection with the digital economy law, in terms of an enabling legislation, and then the institutional structure in the form of the Digital Economy Authority and GovTech, which I'm made to understand will succeed the ICTA. Can you just elaborate on that a bit further for the benefit of the audience? Thanks.
Thanks, Thilan, and thank you for reminding me of the target and how audacious it is. Yes, 2.5x growth in the digital export sector. So I think the starting point is what are the blocking points today which have held us back in terms of a fairly plateauing trajectory. We got to, I think, 1.5 billion a few years ago, and we have been kind of plateaued at that level. I think one reason is that technology itself is changing, and the global market for digital services is also changing, moving away from cost arbitrage, more towards product, IP, trust, governance, and of course AI. So it's important that at each of these inflection points that Sri Lanka catches the wave and thereby gets a new S-curve. So while we have been plateauing, there is a great opportunity today to capture the new S-curve. So in terms of policy, I touched on two of those blocking points, and the governor Dr. Veerasinghe, the Board of Investment, and also the Ministry of Finance have worked hard on this, unlocking some of these. And one in particular is that enabling FDI, which comes into selected high potential startups, to be redeployed in subsidiaries of that entity overseas. Because that enables Sri Lankan startups to very rapidly scale into multinationals or multinational startups with headquarters and IP located in Sri Lanka. So I think that's fundamental. And the flip side of that is what we have seen in the past years, as Deputy Minister also mentioned, that Sri Lankan IP has gone out of the country. Because when international potential is discovered, and if you cannot redeploy your capital, you will relocate your headquarters. So that is one. And when you have the ability to recognize IP revenues, license revenues, and exit events, to monetize them in country and recognize them in country, as opposed to recognizing only the service component, you will see this takeoff. Very quickly on the institutional framework, yes, GovTech is a new entity incorporated just 2 days ago. And GovTech will be the execution arm within this institutional framework. And the Digital Economy Authority will be the strategy and policy institution, which will frame pan-government digital strategies, pan-government standards, and pan-government guidelines, which will be empowered through Cabinet Subcommittee, which will be at the apex of this structure. So we will have a very powerful pan-government environment, which is light in nature in that each institution and each institution within government and each entity across the economy is free to innovate. But there'll be a short list of standards, practices such as API exposure, data sharing, fundamentals, AI ethics, responsible application of AI, etc., which are universal. So I think a mix of consistency and innovation, permissive regulation, coming together will again contribute to this exponential curve of opportunity capture which we envisage.
Thank you, Hans. I'd just like to come back to the Governor very quickly to touch on the point you mentioned about the Board of Investment now considering providing the facility for an inward investment of, say, $1 million, hypothetically, some portion of that to be taken out, to be invested via a capital account transfer for overseas acquisitions. Now, Governor, I'm also aware that during the crisis, capital controls, very strict capital controls were introduced. Now, I'm made to understand that the central bank also, to complement what Hans mentioned, from a monetary policy perspective and a foreign exchange management perspective, is considering liberalizing outward capital account transfers as well. May I ask you to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think this another important the direction of policy in terms of the capital controls, what we call capital flow management instrument that countries are using when countries are facing balance of payment issues and crises. So we had this situation in 2021 and 2022. As a result, Central Bank had to bring back some of the capital flow measures in terms of restricting capital outflows from Sri Lanka because we had a very difficult situation. Now, since then, on the recovery path, we have been gradually relaxing capital flow movements and capital flow measures. Once in 6-month basis, we are recommending to government, Minister of Finance and Parliament takes that decision, endorse that. So on that basis, we have been now gradually relaxing for the all sectors. For example, now starting from the public listed companies, I think there are now limits of $50,000 per year, individuals about $200,000. That is being gradually relaxed for all the sectors. But here, what Hans and others are talking about, the specific sector, startups, all this area, especially technology sector, that is where I think our responsibility, we are basically looking at the whole, not on the sector-wise, but for the whole country. For example, I can see a lot of requests coming from startups in other sectors, for example, construction, and some of the tourism, all the sectors also coming up. So our responsibility is to give equal where playing field to all sectors and gradually relax this. At the same time, we recognize this opportunity here for the startups and all these people, the technology side. That is where the BUI can play an important role. We certainly had discussion with the BUI. We certainly fully support that BUI can focus on sector-wise. So that instrument, I think now we are working with the Digital Ministry and the BUI. So I think this is an instrument that facilitate this kind of outward investment for that sector through the Board of Investment. That's we are now working on that.
That's great news. So greater liberalization in exchange management.
And also at the same time that other liberalization will take place over a gradual basis. Okay. Once we come to more comfortable level, we will be criticized for the whole sectors, not only for this.
Great. I'd like to come to Georg. Dumind, I'll come to you last. So Georg, execution is key. Where the money is going to come from is key, particularly when it comes to public investment component of the digital infrastructure that the government is planning on. Now, the World Bank has identified the ICT, the digital economy, I mean the new terminology, the digital economy for support with World Bank financing to ensure that the financing aspect and the implementation aspects are taken care of. And I believe that this time around it's somewhat unique because you're looking at World Bank coming in on the public sector investment side and the IFC coming in on the private sector investment side to look at funding gaps that are there for the private investments to either obtain equity or borrowing. Can you elaborate on what the World Bank is doing to ensure that these reforms are implemented?
Thank you so much, Tilan, and it's a real pleasure to be part of this panel. And thanks for the question. This is very much building on what the government vision is and making sure that this vision translates into actual implementation. It's also building on World Bank Group's past engagement in Sri Lanka. We have been actively engaged in skills in universities and schools, in STEM education. We have helped to set up first incubators in universities, worked on data protection and on IP protection here, run several hackathons especially focused on female tech entrepreneurs, an area that requires a lot of focus, and I'm sure we will talk about that throughout this conference. We were the largest institutional investor in, so far, I think, the only digital IPO company, PickMe. So it's really building on this very solid foundation, but going forward, we will focus in 3 areas, and this is very much what is sort of vision of the government and Dr. Hans, who is sort of shaping and leading that. One is focus on skills. The other is on policies, and the third one is really on critical infrastructure, digital and beyond. So on the skill part of it, Sri Lanka is in a good place, but it's with its human capital index and so on. But when you talk to startups and industry in general, there are 10,000 of vacancies at the moment which are not filled because there are no right skills there, right? And this is such a rapidly emerging and changing area. So the education sector, which is foundational, cannot probably move with a rapid speed to adjust and provide this. Providing critical reskilling, upskilling, and infrastructure for that will be one of the key areas of our focus, including through bringing a global accelerator into this space, which will focus on sort of a variety of issues. Policy will be another critical area. Already some of speakers earlier, including MasterCard country manager, spoke about data protection, cybersecurity. He also spoke about using data for decision making in tourism. And this is something that we are doing as part of our engagement in tourism. So it's not only sort of the digital angle that we have taken, but broadly how we can take these solutions and bring them into implementation. We will need policies. Sri Lanka is doing well in terms of using, I think 60% of population is online. Used to be 35 before COVID. 60% may be good, but maybe not good enough, right? And there's important policies, how do we get it to much higher numbers? Because that is very much how then scale and reaching out everyone can be achieved. And this is where also the critical infrastructure comes into play. Of course, digital public infrastructure is a foundation of that. And we are in the process of finalizing a program together with the ministry to finance many aspects of that, building on the digital ID, providing with portal and super app for all the key government services that can be on your then fingertips, creating data lockers, data documents, digital signatures, unified data exchange, so that then it will allow pretty much every entity to plug into that and provide service or benefits from this. So this is an array of areas in the infrastructure side that we're going to focus on. So maybe to conclude this part, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was about entrepreneurship. But then the speaker said that the most successful companies have not been those who came with a unique idea, but those who have done good with cloning. I don't see any reason why governments or countries will be different. I don't think we need to reinvent everything, but if we can really adopt and perfect what other countries have done, that will make Sri Lanka incredibly competitive. We look at Estonia and what they have done with their digital public infrastructure and how it created incredible ecosystem for startups and digital industry. We look at countries like Brazil, where they very much simplified, actually created a payment platform with zero transaction costs, with zero fees, and it exploded fintech industry, right? And then, our northern neighbor here, which has been bringing some of these elements together and India has done incredibly well also in that regard. So I think we can learn a lot and just do it even better. And I think this is where World Bank Group can add value by bringing its global knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Georg, for that long explanation. Devinder, may I come to you? As Hans pointed out in his speech, the Board of Investment Law is a bedrock of providing stability and a legal framework for private investment into Sri Lanka. Later came the Port City Law, which is somewhat of an onshore, offshore law. And now the government is proposing to enact a new public-private partnership law. And I'm assuming these three laws would be the bedrock through which private investment in ICT, elsewhere, digitization and manufacturing, etc., tourism would flow into the country. Now, I know the government is contemplating amendments, refinements, updating of these laws without giving away any budget secrets. Is there a sort of a quick synopsis that you can provide to particularly the investors who are present here on the government's plans to make the investment environment more attractive?
Thank you. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this event, and thanks a lot for the question and the opportunity to elaborate the government policy on this. So, as you know, Sri Lanka has largely come out of using the tax lever as the incentive for growth. We did use it in the past. It has worked in some instances. It didn't work in certain instances. So, for whatever reasons, when the economic crisis came, it was largely due to the lower taxes that we had at one particular time. So, I'm sure the government will agree with me that today we are trying to grow this economy, reshape this economy on economic stability and macro fundamentals, rather than using the tax lever as an incentive for investments. But having said that, the government is aware of the competition it faces from regional peers. The Port City Act, which was brought about 5 years ago, and then the Gazette notifications came 2 years back to grant very generous incentives to anyone who's inside the port city, going up to 25 years. Now, that one we have revised from 25 years to reduce period. So if I in the port city, two types of investments. One is the primary investment, which is called the guys who are putting up the structures. They will have a maximum of 15 years tax holiday. That has been approved by the IMF and the cabinet. It will not be legislated yet. The secondary investment is where all you guys come in, the IT services, regional operating headquarters, trading houses, all the people who are going to come and invest inside Sri Lanka, but to serve clients and customers overseas, not clients and customers in Sri Lanka. Those companies will, we have somewhat agreed, I am telling this, but it's not approved by cabinet yet, but it will get approved, is that we'll have a reduced rate of 7.5% rate for those companies.
7.5.
7.5%, what is called secondary investment. That is, all the companies who are providing software, IT, technology, service-oriented exports outside of Sri Lanka will have a 7.5% tax rate. So that is what we have agreed with IMF, and that has been granted. And then the BOI is looking at what is called the Strategic Development Projects Act. Under the SDP Act, we had in the past very liberal concessions, again given running up to about 25 years, and the structure you seated here and around were all subject to the benefits of the SDP. So that has been revised again, and the SDP tax hold has been fixed at a maximum of 10 years. And for the minimum investment required is $50 million. So if you have $50 million, it will range from 5 to 10 years. Unfortunately, it's not as generous as what it used to be, but we are unable at the moment to be more generous than this. And this was also a hard-fought victory, in my view, that we had, because we are under a program, we are now still out of the woods as much as we are, we are achieving remarkable growth rates, etc. So I think, in my view, the future for the next 5 years will be for us to stay within the framework, stabilizing macro fundamentals on exchange rates, interest rates, inflation, etc., and have a modest growth. If you target for 7-8% growth rate, use domestic funds, there will be pressure on the reserves as well as the currency and the interest rates. So the only way out for Sri Lanka to grow at 6-7% is FDI. And that is why we are really targeting get the big FDIs into the country. You asked about the NAPP law. The NAPP law with support of the ADB has been put for public consultations the last 10 days. It's currently under public consultation, so you can give your views on the NAPP law. That will be the first time in this country, in the history of this country, that we are passing what is called a public-private partnership law to enable and legislate public-private partnerships. So that law will come into force. It's been discussed. We are hoping that the NAPP law, the SDP Act, the Revised Porcity Act, and the SOE bill, with support of my friend here, I hope he'll see the final draft and okay it for me, so that we can push all these four before the budget for enactment. So that is the growth part that the country is focusing on. If we feel that with these 4 laws, we'll create the impetus and the environment for us to encourage FDI into this country and take it above the 5% growth rate rather than leveraging on the tax side. That's the view the government is taking.
Thank you, Duminder. And I'd like to pose this question to either Duminder or Hans, and maybe ask for the support of the World Bank on a sore point with me personally as an investment banker, and that is the absence of a limited liability partnership law in the country, where we have a situation now where if you want to pool funds, often these funds are pooled in an offshore jurisdiction and comes into the country because of the multiple layers of taxation that prevail when you don't have LLP legislation. Now, I'm made to understand that there is a collective investment scheme that's proposed under the governance of the Securities Exchange Commission. Can I have either one of you to respond to that? And can I also propose that this law as well be prioritized in order to enable attraction of venture capital and pool funds?
You're very right, Thilan. And the government is very cognizant and is also committed to solve this in the space of a few months. And that is the double tax phenomenon which arises unless you have an LLP structure or have a collective investment scheme structure similar to unit trust. So the work that has been done to date is twofold. One is to work towards an LLP, and I think that requires a little more consultation with the Ministry of Finance, and I think Duminder can expand on that. But the government is committed to be competitive with all the regional investment markets by facilitating such a scheme. But there's also the shorter run measure which might be possible, which is where with some tweaks to the SEC law, it would be possible to classify selected venture capital funds which qualify in terms of qualified investors, the quality of investment, as well as the quantum, for venture capital funds to qualify as CIS, and then once qualified as CIS, enjoy the same tax pass-through facilities as unit trusts. I did not mention it specifically earlier because this is work in progress, but a very short runway to solve this as well.
Dumind, you want to make a quick comment?
No, just to say that the LLP law, we looked at it about 3 or 4 years ago as well. But the issue came with professional services. Because whilst we had to find a way of ring-fencing the professional services of accounting, legal, etc., from getting into LLPs, because that remains a liability of negligence. So that's where the issue came up last time. So I guess if you have the LLP laws ring-fencing the professional services, then that might be another way of looking at it, but it has come from the Companies Act. So, but the income tax law has to get changed because as under the current income tax law, a trust is ignored. It's only conduit through which so your trust is not tax separated. So I think it requires a change to the income tax law as well as the Companies Act if you are bringing it in. Ring-fencing the professional services is also required from those institutions as well.
Yeah, just to add it, that's where the collective investment scheme is a shorter runway, we believe, which already has, the tax laws do not have to be adjusted.
Just very quickly, first, yeah, I can commit to support this initiative if it requires World Bank support or any sort of global knowledge or drafting and all. But I just want to emphasize that this is very important, but one of the factors why companies would not necessarily register in Sri Lanka and will be in Singapore or elsewhere, right? This is definitely taxation. It's one of them. How quickly you can register, how quickly can you set up a company, how quickly can you close the company. This is another aspect that is critical. How access to early stage capital, this is another critical aspect that is essential. Movement of capital, and it's great that governor is taking lead in, easing it for this sector. So those are all elements. In all these areas, we are working together with either the industry or the ministry to make sure that we can have a dent and move the needle.
Hans, coming back to you, in your speech you mentioned about virtual special economic zones. And there, of course, there will be physical aspects, but you're talking of similar to Estonia and probably Ireland as well. Now, would that be captured in any of the laws that we've discussed in this panel today, or is that a new law or going to be part of the Board of Investment law, for example?
Yes, so the approval of the Board of Investment has been given for this concept. So I think it's from there, the crafting of regulation, because there's nothing, I think, really preventing this mechanism of virtual incorporation, as well as the ability for investors in a very friction-free mode of interaction and engagement, to Jevog's point, set up in Sri Lanka virtually and be able to also enjoy facilities of capital mobility and the talent mobility as well, within a tight frame. And I want to even qualify what I said earlier about the capital mobility, that within a tight frame defined by the BOI, where it's risk mitigated, it's for qualified investors, qualified ventures, minimum requirements with respect to FDI, etc. So both the virtual SEZ and the facility for outward subsidiary creation, these are two initiatives which I think are ring-fenced, but will set the pace for a new wave of capital release.
Dumind, from that I'd like to come to the aspect of physical infrastructure, because there will be companies who will be outsourcing who will need physical infrastructure that is plug and play. And I'm happy to note that, for example, Hatch and Trace City are both located in government-owned buildings. Now, going back 20-some years, when at that time, when I was running the BOI, we decided to make Mala Bay an IT zone, a policy decision was taken by the cabinet that anyone making a minimum investment of X number of dollars would be, to set up an IT park, would be able to pay the government valuer's valuation over a 20-year period. And that's how the London Stock Exchange, at that time Millennium Information Technology, built a $10, $20, $30 million IT park. Now, can the government consider its dilapidated assets, such as buildings or warehouses, and look at a pricing mechanism that's demand-driven as opposed to revenue maximization, which is typically the approach that government valuer would take, to ensure that physical infrastructure is available as well, driven by demand and cost structures within which Sri Lanka has to be competitive?
Yeah. So, with this objective in mind, Thilan, the HE has actually directed to see whether we can take this beyond Colombo.
Okay.
And the BOI has already started 2 IT parks, one in Kurunegala, one in Galle, which was commenced some time ago, and to reactivate those 2 IT parks on the basis of what you suggested now, so that we are trying to see whether there can be a private investor who can take the entire park on a PPP basis and then market it to IT companies and do the plug-and-play operation. There are 2 locations we looked at, one in Galle and one in Matara, one in Kurunegala, because we feel that there's proximity to labor, and even if we go out, we need to make sure that we have talent pool available for the investors. So those are the 2 ones that we're looking at to operate in the context what you just suggested. But in terms of identifying buildings, land in Colombo to do a plug-and-play or warehousing conversion has not been done at the moment, to my knowledge, to be frankly.
Okay.
But that's something we can look at. But on the government valuers valuation, I know there's an issue because any land, any building owned by government that is to be offered to our private sector has to be based on government valuers valuation. And that is what the procurement guidelines say. So the government has developed a policy. For example, now we are developing a policy for the Port City government section. We have 1/3 of the Port City owned by the government for public infrastructure such as hospitals, schools and universities. Now there, the government valuation is 20 billion a perch, which will not be feasible for us to sell to any public, to any private investment. So we are looking at develop a policy to see how for certain public interest investments, how we can develop a policy for reducing the impact of the government valuers valuation, so that it becomes feasible for private investors to come and invest. And when the industry develops, it generates business activity through taxation, through the economic activity it generates, and the multiplier effect it has. The government can collect the taxes and recover what it had to forego as result of value. That's a line that we're looking at and thinking. But we are just in the process of developing that policy. Because it's a very controversial area, right?
Yes.
Giving government land at reduced prices has led to a lot of controversy in the past. So we have to make sure that whatever that we do has a transparent, and that's the motto of the president, to be transparent and subject to good governance. So we are developing the policy. Not easy, we are doing that. But the 2 tech parks we are doing in Galle and Mathura, for the people who are here, you can talk to the BOI and see how you can come into the 2 tech parks for investments. That will be on a PPP basis.
Thank you, Dhuminder. I'd like to come back to the governor on the subject of fintech. I think I believe prior to your time, the central bank has been somewhat criticized that the financial technology and regulatory sandbox framework that the CBSL had was too restrictive, that requires startups, for example, to partner with licensed financial institutions. Governor, I believe some liberalization on that sandbox is being proposed under the new framework. Can you elaborate on that so that fintech investors can get some comfort?
Yes, I think we introduced this regulated sandbox in 2019. Since then, we have not seen much fintech solutions coming up into the sandbox. There are certain restrictions. One thing I see mainly, there are stringent requirements under AML safety regulation. That's one thing that prevents some banks, some fintech solutions coming into the application. Second one is mainly the requirement to come through a financial institution, bank or non-financial institution. That's the second one. So we are now relaxing those 2 requirements so that there will be a more relaxed environment so that fintech innovators can come and, do this, engage with the regular sandbox that we are having. That's the one part. I think other part I would like to say is not only the sandbox thing, we need to have enabling regulations and enablers in the other parts also. For example, now, On the payment area, digital payments area, we have placed infrastructure in place for several years. And digital payments have been picking up also, especially not only the QR, but mainly other digital payments. But to popularize and increase the usage, you need to have other enablers. For example, now the transport card is something we have been talking several years. Still, it's not coming now. I know Hans is working on that. And also several other, so GovPay is one that we introduced, but still now is more number of things are coming, institutions are joining, that also help to innovators to come up with solutions. And other one, for example, transport, not only the transport but also the highway, this payment now, GovPay step, but still the latest one is not that go and pay to cash or card, it's just to run through the system, and then that's kind of enablers need to be. That's where another one is the digital public infrastructure in terms of unique ID. That's where India picked up that fast. But once you have all this in place, I think payment infrastructure is as good as in other country. So obviously there are weaknesses, there are gaps, there were gaps in the sandbox that we are now addressing that. With that relaxation, with the regulations and enabling in other areas like the education or teaching, universities, and also the transport and other areas, then obviously there are a lot more innovators come and bring in innovation, then we can support them.
So it sounds as if you are planning to publish this in a roadmap. For example, payments and settlement systems roadmap would be published shortly so that everyone can understand the reforms that are taking place?
Of course, now, in fact, we have been, in the payment infrastructure, we have this one is, as I said, payment infrastructure. Other one is the like Lankapay, the institution development arrangement. Other one is the National Payment Council. That's where the policies and all this are made. So now we had already developed for next 5 years, under National Payment Council, what is the next basically policies and the way forward for the next 5 years. So that will address what are the modern needs of, for example, support the government initiatives on digital economy, and what's our role in terms of payment infrastructure, and also the facilitation and building institutions to support that innovation. That will be out soon.
Final question to Hans. Hans, you're also working on amendments to the national procurement laws governing digital services procurement, introducing a greater degree of robustness to the procurement process, which means that there would be a procurement process that will be implemented to fast-track digitization of government institutions. Are there any priorities in terms of what you're looking at in terms of digitizing government, and what sort of time frames are you assuming that this process will take? A very quick answer.
So first, to put in context, the National Procurement Commission is a constitutionally defined entity, and I think the context here is that we will work together with the NPC to develop guidelines, a set of guidelines which are specific to digital solutions procurement by government. And the objective here is the democratization of access to the government opportunities, so that they're not limited to large companies and also limited to very long cycle procurements. So we have to move towards more outcome-based procurement, agile procurement, short cycle procurements, all within the aegis of the National Procurement Commission. And discussions are ongoing in framing such a set of guidelines, and also the implementation infrastructure which would be required to execute, not least the talent, the procurement talent that you would require to have a fast cycle procurement for digital services. And the more we research this, what we find is this is not a problem unique to Sri Lanka. Nearly every jurisdiction, the digital space wants to run faster than the procurement guidelines in the respective countries would permit. But we are now making good progress on designing a new set of guidelines.
Thank you. Final question to Georg. Focus on the IFC. I believe you are looking at supporting accelerators in Sri Lanka and also entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka approaching overseas accelerators. Can you just briefly elaborate on what the thinking and the role that IFC is proposing to play in that regard?
Yeah, so again, this will be joint World Bank group effort.
Okay.
And this is very much coming back to what we were saying, that how do we sort of create that critical ecosystem for startups so that they can access capital at different stages. So we are looking at bringing one of the global accelerators into Sri Lanka, but ensuring that they partner with local players. So, but by no means it will be displacing efforts. On the contrary, it will become sort of amplifying this and then building lasting foundation as they exit, sort of it continues. But we're also looking at taking it also to the next level, and hopefully we'll be partnering with VCs to scale up this access of the VC financing in Sri Lanka, also trying to focus on some of the parts of the country that we were talking about in the north and east, and so we're actively exploring opportunities there. So those are some of the next steps.
Okay.
Stay tuned. Hopefully in the coming months we'll already have some.
And tourism, you're also going to look at making Colombo attractive for digital nomads and the likes.
I mean, thanks
right?
for asking that. Let me then very quickly react to that, which is going a little back to your question about taking properties, converting and all, right? So we are working at Colombo, making it really a destination on its own, not just a 24 or 12-hour transit for people. We're also looking at economic cluster in Jaffna. Now, both have huge potential on the digital side. Now, what is interesting, if you Google for many big cities, what is the cool hipster area for tourists? Very often it will be an area where you have incubators, accelerators, sort of this, because they do create the kind of attractive ecosystems that also many of the tourists like to go and spend. And so what we're trying to do for Colombo, the fourth area, etc., and there are some buildings hopefully will be given for proper private-public partnership. Many of you are supporting that effort. Hopefully that will allow us to move in the direction you mentioned, but bringing these two industries together. It may not be obvious that they so much amalgamate together or create synergies, but they do.
Thank you. I think we've run out of time. I thought there might be questions from the audience, but Hans will close the session. And I want to thank each and every panelist for this wonderful session that we have, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, can we have a big round of applause for our moderators and our panelists as well? We'd like to invite you to please take your seats. Thank you very much. Thank you.